But yes, strangely enough, hair salons are still open and they're exempt from the lockdown.
So today on Someone You Should Meet, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're going a bit further afield than we would normally do. We're actually going to Brisbane, Australia today. And it's part of a series where we check in with people across the globe just to see how they're coping with the COVID-19 pandemic and just to see kind of what life is like for them. So with that in mind, we're in Brisbane today and I'm joined by Tony Rosenberg. Hi, Tony.
Hi, how you doing, Claire?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
We're pretty good. We're in lockdown, so yeah, it could be worse.
Okay, so in a second, I want you to tell me what lockdown looks like for you guys there. But the reason we're chatting with you today, Tony, is that you're actually good friends with my producer, Edward Kramer. You two go back years and years, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. I'm going to guess like 25, maybe 25
Wow.
years.
More,
Okay.
Diego. I'm chiming in this episode. Diego, my son, is 25 years old, so we go back probably
Further, yeah.
a little further. No, he was born when we met in Brazil. Actually, we were both living in Brazil.
So how old was Diego when we met? He must have been a newborn.
He was 6 months. He was newborn.
There you go. All right, so 25. I was pretty close.
25 years. You're right. And you were actually, I got to say, having you both on in front of me, you were my first introduction as a Southern California boy to the world of Anglophones.
In Brazil.
In Brazil, because I don't know if it was your doing, if you remember the school we taught at where we met. It was one of these business schools that are like pop up like weeds in Brazil. It's a whole industry, I'm sure, in probably all of Latin America. But so you, I don't know if you did it. You assembled. You had your Kiwis, you had your Aussies, you had your Brits, you had your Brits North, you had your Brits South. And I remember a staff meeting where there was all this English being spoken and I was the only American. I said, wow, they never taught us that it's at school. It was great.
Yeah, I remember those funny meetings because the Brazilians knew more English than most of us.
At least how to speak it and write it correctly.
Yeah.
I have to say, are we talking about proper English here?
Yes. The one that you speak, Claire.
Oh, of course. Well, listen, we'll go back to that and kind of your relationship with Edward and your time in Brazil, because I'm really wanting to chat with you about that too. But first of all, like you mentioned lockdown, you're in lockdown too. Like, what does your daily life look like right now in Brisbane?
So at the moment, most places are closed. In Australia, probably the most important thing that was closed were the pubs. So that really stopped a lot of gatherings. So the cities, most of the main cities are in lockdown. The essential services obviously are up and running, but most people are respecting the lockdown. That would be for a few different reasons. Either you're a believer that this is a good thing to do, or you fear the fine, which is $1,300 if the police stop you on the street and you're not really on the street for a good reason. Something like going to a doctor's appointment, going to the hospital, going to the supermarket, anything that's really essential, you're allowed to be on the street.
And Tony,
also,
are they? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. You mentioned kind of, what you're being stopped for, but how are they enforcing that? Like, how do you know? How do they know that you're going where you say you're going?
It really is a random check, so you can be stopped anywhere. Some of the states within Australia have, I think most of them have put border checks. So in order to go across the border from one state to the next, you need to go online beforehand and fill out a form and explain why you need to go across the border. You need to print out that piece of that authorization, and you need to carry it with you. So at the border, they will check you. I think you can actually get a sticker now. I think it's one that you print at home and just add water or just put it on your dashboard so that the police don't actually have to stop you. But if you don't have something like that in your car, they'll stop you at the border. So domestic flights have all pretty much stopped. There's, I think, one flight a day between all the main cities, and all international flights have been cancelled.
Okay. And How are people taking that over there? Because I know here, certainly over the weekend, even here in San Diego, there are people that are getting restless now. They're holding protests. They're demanding beaches be reopened, etc. How are people kind of coping there? Are you seeing frustration kind of creeping a little bit there?
Yes, there's quite a few things happening. We've got the deniers who go out onto the street and protest, or they just flout the rules and take the risk of getting the fine. We've also got the fact that yesterday, so today's the 21st of April here, I think it's the 20th in the US. We're
Yep.
always ahead in terms of time, not much in intelligence, but certainly in time. And so
I'm English, I'll have you know. Don't you love you with this American thing?
So yesterday we had, let's say, a milestone where 3 states registered no new cases. So, of course, this was on the news and everybody got excited, and some of the business owners were like, yay, we're going to open tomorrow. And the Prime Minister was like, just slow down there, buddy, because that's not how it's going to work. So there's a lot of people who are very anxious to get back to some sort of normalcy, but at the moment, nothing has changed. As I said, there are people flouting the rules. There are people who are trying to get around it. It's a risk because the fine is pretty hefty. There was a guy who ran tried to run a car show, a vintage car show. He invited 58 people over Facebook, and as soon as they arrived, the cops were there handing out fines to everyone. So there were over 60 fines given to all the people that were turning up to this car show. So the police they're on it. But yeah, there's a lot of frustration. People want to get back to it.
What about grocery stores? Can you get what you want in the grocery stores, or are you kind of seeing the shortages we're seeing, like toilet paper, kitchen roll, flour?
Yeah, of course, the initial one was toilet paper, which really nobody seemed to understand. That's still, there's still a certain shortage of that, and now you're allowed to buy. Some supermarkets have put limits. Most of them have put limits. Some limits are quite strict. Where I live, which is a little bit out of town, you're allowed to buy 1 roll, not even 1 package, but 1 roll. The toilet paper has been delivered individually wrapped, and now it's only 1 roll per person, which I thought was rather extreme, but that's I guess that's their rule. Yeah, things like hand sanitizer, certain soaps have run out. Washing powder is becoming quite rare these days, and the prices have obviously gone up. Flour, as you say, pasta, the cheaper pasta. You can get the gourmet stuff, but the cheaper pasta and tomato sauce and all those sorts of, I guess they're basic and cheaper items. They're starting to be, there are some shortages. It depends on where you are in the city or in the state. Some places there are shortages of one thing and abundances in others. We did have an incident in Adelaide the other day where a man went back to the supermarket a month later with, I think he had 150 packages of toilet paper and 100 bottles of, or 100 or 200 bottles of hand sanitizer. It might be more, I can't remember. And he tried to get a refund, and the supermarket said, you can turn around and leave, buddy. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the police confiscated all of his purchases.
Oh my gosh, how crazy. It's funny you mentioned individually wrapped toilet rolls, because in a store here, that's what they're doing. You can only buy like 1 toilet roll and it's in like its own packaging, which is quite funny. What do you do for work, and how is kind of COVID-19 impacting you right now, Tony, work-wise?
So as Edward mentioned before, I've always been involved in language or linguistics or teaching or writing. And at the moment I'm working for the federal government. I'm a technical writer at at what's called CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, which is the equivalent to the FAA in the United States. And basically I write documents, technical documents, together with technical people, because I'm not an aviator. So I sit together with special matter experts, and we write manuals and guidance material, advisory material. We take the legislation and turn it into something that people can understand and use. checklists and assessment forms and all that sort of stuff. It's a pretty boring job, I will say. But so I can do this job from anywhere. I could literally be in any country as long as I have an internet hookup. But the federal government had its own rules, and they were a little bit slow. I will say they're a little bit slow to implement these rules. I think they were a bit concerned about the economy, and they didn't want to just jump in and flatten the economy. So there was a slow and very gradual introduction of the lockdown. And so now we've been on lockdown. The federal government's been on lockdown for about 3 weeks. And at the moment, the date for return to work is the 8th of May. But that's a federal decision. Each state is also implementing its own rules. Victoria, for example, down south, where Melbourne is the capital, they've had very large numbers of cases. So it seems that the state has implemented some very, very strict rules, and they have way more police on the streets than in Queensland, where I am, which is up north. Our numbers are lower. So I guess they always say that Queensland's a little bit slower. They say the breeze here is actually slower. It's the Florida of the United States. It's the Brighton of England. You know, it's the country's tourism spot. So everything's a little bit slower, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more laid back. So I guess our police are even a bit more laid back.
Interesting. So they're saying that the 8th of May is a proposal as far as when things could return to normal. Have you been given any idea over there as to what normal is going to look like? I know here that whenever they mention about things getting back to normal, it's going to be very gradual, kind of a staggered return to normal. What's the situation like there?
Well, at the moment, the plan is a bit vague. There are a couple of proposals put forward, things like a total opening of the economy, and the government is contemplating that. There's also a proposal for a gradual comeback. There's a proposal for only government services to come back. So there are lots of proposals being thrown out onto the table. Nothing has been decided. It looks like New Zealand's a little bit ahead of the game on this one. They have a proposal. I think last night they extended their lockdown for 1 more week, and they're going to go through, they've actually got a whole system where lockdown 4, lockdown 3, lockdown 2. So they've planned their return to normal. However, what normal looks like, nobody knows. A lot of small businesses have closed down already. My wife's business, for example, closed down. So I don't know whether normal is going to be the normal that we think it might be. I think certainly small businesses, restaurants, cafes, things like that, I don't think they'll be opening up too soon.
What does your wife do? What's her business?
Well, she had a salon, a beauty salon, where she also did Reiki therapy. She's doing Reiki therapy online, which I didn't even know was a thing. But so that's sort of saving her sanity. Certainly not paying too many bills, but it saves her sanity. I think more and more people are looking for that kind of thing, because with the lockdown, you know, frustrations and a little bit of, I guess, mental boredom, and people look for maybe a way to get out of that that prison feeling. You know, we feel like we're prisoners in our own homes. So a lot of people have been doing that. So, beauty salons were one of the first businesses to close down here because of the proximity of the kind of work they do. But strangely enough, the government allowed hair salons to stay open, and they consider them essential services. I don't know. Of course,
Wow,
I don't have a problem.
Still open then?
I don't have a problem with the hair salon, but yes, strangely enough, hair salons are still open and they're exempt from the lockdown.
Wow. Okay, that's random.
Very
I know hair
strange.
salons
Yeah.
are certainly closed down here. Okay, so your wife is from Brazil, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and what is the situation like there? Are you still in contact with family in Brazil?
Yes, we've been using all the different social media platforms, FaceTime, WhatsApp, Zoom, all of those things to contact people in Brazil. Now, it's hard because of the time difference. We're 13 hours ahead here in Australia, 13 hours ahead. So we're falling asleep when they're waking up, and when they're falling asleep, we're waking up. So we really have to time it well.
I know, I hear your pain. All my family are back in the UK, so we're kind of 8 or 9 hours apart, depending what time of year it is. And it's crazy. So yeah, I feel you on that one.
Yeah, the other thing is the connections between some countries are a bit tricky. Brazil, certain parts of Brazil have excellent internet connections. Where my wife's parents are, not so much. So we do rely on good weather, believe it or not. When there's too much cloud, the satellites just don't get through, so we can't get a connection.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's that can be very frustrating. Okay, so talk to me about what family back in Brazil are telling you about what their lockdown looks like.
So in Brazil, I think they have a situation that's not too different to the US at the moment, where the federal government doesn't really believe that COVID-19 is an issue, and the state governments are sort of doing their own thing. So most of our family, I think all of our family, live in the state of São Paulo and close to, if not in, the capital of São Paulo, which is also called São Paulo. And so most of the people there are following the lockdowns. There, of course, are the same as everywhere else. There are deniers. There are people who just want to get back to work, things like that. But there are essential services that are still working. Our family are locked down. Our son is still over there. He's in our house and he's locked down. He's in IT, so he can work remotely. That's great. And other parts of the family, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, they're all doing their best to stay in lockdown. It's hard there because I think the shortages there are a little bit more drastic to what we're experiencing here in Australia. So they
like when you say shortages, what do you mean, like PPE or?
Yeah, certainly the what do they call them? It's ventilators, right? The ventilators for the hospitals. Yeah, the ventilators. There's a huge shortage of those in Brazil, and it seems that the federal government does not want to fund or even facilitate the purchase of those. So the state governors have to run after these sorts of things themselves, and there's a problem because when things arrive in Brazil, they have to go through federal customs. So they're always trying to work a way around that. So that's, those kinds of shortages are an issue.
Okay, going back to your situation in Australia, how is your hospital situation, or hospital system rather, coping?
Quite well, because our numbers are low, right? So our hospitals here, our public hospitals, are all free to permanent residents and citizens. To those who are not permanent residents or citizens, they may have to rely on a private health fund or plan. Usually those are foreign students. We have a lot of foreign students here. A lot of them left recently, but so they will need a health plan. By law, they need one to even enter the country anyway. So our hospitals are not doing too bad because our numbers are low. I think we're at 6,600 cases in Australia. I think we've had 60-something deaths, roughly. So in comparison with other countries, our numbers are quite low.
Yeah, that's
so the hospitals they're okay for the moment. Yeah.
Okay, I know that you and New Zealand, you're both very your rates of contraction and also deaths are very low, which is great news. And how do you view how the US is dealing with this situation in Australia?
Yeah, I think we're all a bit shocked as to the numbers that we see in the US. We didn't really think it would be that bad. I don't really know what to expect because much like Brazil, the federal government and the state governments are not really working together, it seems. So that's a bit shocking. And we've always looked towards the US as Australian politics has always looked to the US as being a kind of a big brother who's got it right. You know, they're the successful big brother. So we seem to have followed in their full footsteps in quite a number of ways. We've always been an ally to the US. So, you know, in all different ways, business, war, things like that. Australia's always been there to either lend a helping hand, lend support, or just sort of you know, give moral support even. But at this moment, there seems to be a bit of we're all a bit shocked. We're all a bit shocked, I guess. There's not much else I can say. The television is not helping.
No, it really isn't. And I think, you know, it's a good idea to kind of limit news consumption right now and just kind of get to know the basic facts and leave it at that. Otherwise, yeah, it could drive you crazy for sure. And why did you leave Brazil? Because you were there over 20 years, weren't you?
I was in Brazil for about 24, almost 25 years. I had set up my life. I was ready to retire in Brazil, actually. I had a very similar job in the last 7 years that I was there. I worked for a federal credit agency. A development bank is actually what they called themselves. And I was a technical writer there as well. So I produced contracts and tenders and all that technical stuff, which is quite boring. But it was an interesting job because Brazil was, at that stage, they were really set on moving ahead. So there was a lot of financing going into roads and hospitals and schools and really moving ahead. But then there was a lack of confidence in the government, and the president was ousted. It's debatable whether that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. It was illegal or not. It turns out she hadn't done anything illegal if you follow the courts. And so as I worked for a federal government, the fact that the president had been removed, the government changed. And literally, the new government walked into the bank and asked 400 of us to stand up from our desks and escorted us to the door. So we were removed from the bank quite dramatically and immediately. And I said to my wife, we might need to think about, you know, just going to Australia for a sabbatical. So we had already put in some paperwork for her to become a permanent resident. And there was no reason for that. It was just, we should get around to it one day. And I eventually did. And that was months before this, the impeachment of the president happened. And so I thought, well, you know, we've already got the request in for the permanent residency. Let's go and spend a year in Australia. So we packed up our stuff and thought, okay, we'll spend a sabbatical there and see what happens. So we came to Australia, and then the situation in Brazil got worse and worse and worse. And we decided, well, maybe we'll extend it. And here we are 4 years down the road. And here we are living in Australia now.
Wow. Okay. And how has it been adapting back to living in Australia for yourself? And obviously your wife isn't from there originally, so I'm presuming that was all quite new to her too.
Yeah, we had visited a couple of times, but visiting a country and living in a country, as I'm sure you know, is very different.
Oh yeah, very, very different. Yeah.
So when we came back, I think I had fooled myself a little bit as well, because I left Australia in 1989 and came back in 2016. So I was 20 something, almost over 25 years away from the country. And we have a selective memory, don't we? And so I remember all these great things about Australia and how this was amazing and I loved this, and we got here and things were very, very different. The country had grown up for good or bad, whatever that means, but it had definitely changed. So yeah, there was a real learning curve on my part, even more so for her, because she had never lived in a country that was so organized and so, let's say, I don't want to say controlled because it sounds like, you know, a military idea, but things have a place and there are forms for everything, and you follow the rules and it all works. It all sort of, all the gears fit together and it moves forward. Whereas Brazil, it's a bit more organic. You know, if you want to get some paperwork done, you sort of have to be chummy with the guy and say, hi, I love your, you know, your shirt, or you say to the woman, oh, your hair is wonderful, and things sort of move along that way. Whereas in Australia,
a bit of flattery goes a long way in Brazil.
Absolutely. So that sort of learning curve was certainly huge for us. Adapting to all the changes. You know, we didn't, when I left, we didn't have coffee shops. There were no coffee shops. That's not a thing that Australia. We only used instant coffee in Australia, and so when I came back, there were all these coffee shops, and it was a coffee shop culture, and all of my friends are going out for lattes, and you know, it's like, you drank tea when I left here, you know. So you know, just even the cultural things had changed. Live music is a dying art now. It used to be flourishing. So, you know, things have definitely changed.
Well, talk to me about music, because music's a big part of your life too, isn't it?
Yes, I've always sung in bands. Even in Brazil, I sang in a few different bands. The music industry is always a bit up and down, or you know, it has its moments. In Brazil, I sang in a soul band, in a couple of different rock bands, and it's a niche area in Brazil, because Brazilian music is way more popular and has the radio in its favor, whereas the niche music doesn't really get played on the radio too much.
Tony, can I just ask, what language did you sing in when you were in Brazil? Was it Portuguese, or did you sing in English?
No, I always sang in English. I never had the courage, even though my Portuguese is pretty good. I never had the courage. My wife always made fun of me when I was singing in the shower, so I lost courage to get up there and sing in Portuguese. I have actually done some backing vocals in a concert, but you know, backing vocals, you can hide you can hide things. Thank God.
Oh, that's funny. And can I just say, and I haven't heard the word niche pronounced like that since I lived in England, because they say niche here, and I always want to correct them. I always want to correct them, but I think no, you know, let it go. That yes, niche and not niche. Yes.
I was going to correct you both, but I stayed quiet.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so tell me about your band that you're in right now.
So here in Australia, of course, I got here and we were setting up life, renting an apartment, buying a car, all the basic things that you need. But I felt my cultural release was not being satisfied. So I said to my wife, I'm going to go back and find a band. So I got onto Facebook, and there's, you know, obviously these pages with, you know, looking for wanted musicians in Brisbane and all those sorts of things. So I entered an ad, went for an audition, and got the job. But what was funny was they gave me a list of 5 songs to do for the audition, and I knew 3 of them, and the other 2, I was like, what songs are these? So I got onto Google and discovered these songs, and they were huge Australian hits, but I'd never heard them. So when I went to the audition, they were going, okay, let's do this song. I was like, I must say, I've never heard this song. And I looked like the biggest idiot, because they said, this is an iconic, this is born in the USA, in the US, you know, like, how could you not have heard this song? And the
what
song
were
was,
they? Which songs
it was
were they?
Better by the Screaming Jets. And another song was, I've Got You on My Mind by Powderfinger. And because I'd been away for so long, I have a very big cultural gap when it comes to Australia, because I got so involved in Brazil and Latin America, I kind of didn't pay attention to what was happening in Australia. And now people will make references to television shows, to songs, and I'll be like, sorry, what? I actually seem like a foreigner.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because even now, I've been here a couple of years, and you know, people are talking about TV shows back home and certain celebrities. I don't know who they're talking about, Tony. I've got no clue. I'm like, I don't know. I don't get like English TV anymore, so I really don't know.
true enough. And in the US, you have so many channels anyway. Why would you watch English TV?
Yeah, although, it is nice sometimes to kind of, hear your own kind of mother tongue, as it were.
Niche.
Yeah,
Yeah.
niche, exactly. So is there anything you miss about Brazil?
Oh God. I would say 99% of it. Yeah.
Like
Brazil's an
what?
amazing country. It's so colorful, and I have to say it is the people. The people make the country. Brazilians are so receptive and so welcoming, and so colorful, and they have so many cultural features that differ between the states. So when you go to the Northeast, the food it has an African feel to it. You go to the South, it's got a European feel to it. The music is amazing, and Brazilians are incredible musicians. When they play an instrument, they really play it. Like, there's no one sort of, oh, I can play a couple of songs. No, they play like really well. So it's really nice. The cultural aspects to Brazil are amazing. So I really miss that. I miss the people. I do miss this organic way of life, where it can be frustrating. There are certain things that are frustrating, but at the same time, it's not as cold is a very harsh word, but it's very cold the way things are done here. You go to a place, you fill in a form, you put it in. In Brazil, you'd go to the place, you'd speak to someone at the front desk. They'd say, oh yeah, did you see the soccer match yesterday? And have a big conversation. And this is just to get the form. So you get the form, then they'll say, oh, you can go over there and fill it out. Here's my pen. And it's more organic. It's more, the contact is more human. Is that a horrible thing to say about Australia?
Yeah, I get you. I think probably the UK is a little bit like that too. Edward, what do you miss most about Brazil?
Oh, a lot. I was just going to say a lot of the same things. I mean, it's definitely the growing up in the U.S. There's always the Latin way of looking at life and the Anglo way of looking at life, and that the Anglo way of looking at life is with a watch and everything is on schedule and measured by the clock at the time on your wrist. And the Latin way of life is just a sequence of events. First, I'm going to do this, and when I'm done with that, I'll do the next thing, and I'll meet somebody else over here and do that. And like, so yeah, that sort of organic way of living. I'm seeing more of that actually in California. That less and less of the sort of mechanisms of life, and more of the connections that we have with each other. Hopefully. Or maybe that's my imagination. Tony, I have a request for a song that the world's waiting for from you.
Well, let's hear it.
I don't know if you remember when we sat down with the director of the school we were at, and we started using every Brazilian phrase and idiom we could think of in the meeting, and she nearly lost her mind. So, you remember that?
Vaguely, yeah. I vaguely remember that, yeah.
We sat, and instead of saying phrases in English like get a clue or I'll square that away, we would use the Portuguese ones, and like get a clue is, no, you need to touch yourself.
Oh my goodness, I can
And
see
we
you
say,
two are hard work to teach.
oh yeah, that has your face.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's some interesting language.
if you could get a lyric that you'd have your own niche.
Yeah. Good pronunciation.
I was about to say, yes, that's much better. Music to my ears, that, Edward, thank you. By the way, Tony, what is your band called?
The band? Oh yeah, we're called Second Chance. The reason we're called Second Chance is because we're a bunch of old guys and we think we have a second chance.
Well, maybe you do. And hey, how are you still managing to kind of rehearse, or are you doing it like digitally, like virtually, via Zoom or whatever, or how's that taking shape?
Yeah, so the band is on lockdown as well. I have invested and bought an audio interfacer, so it hasn't arrived yet. So I'm hoping to see how that goes. I see all these people doing these presentations on Facebook, and I was like, how do they do it? So I contacted someone and said, look, give me some tips. And they said, oh, you need to have, this and that, and you need to put it all together. And I hope I can work out the technical issues, but I'm not sure. I think most of us could do it. I'm a bit concerned about the drummer, though. That can't be easy.
Well, yeah, although people are getting really creative in this current environment. I mean, like my girls, I mean, I know obviously singing is easier than, you know, playing the drums in that sense, but my girls are part of a church choir, and every Wednesday they have this Zoom like choir
Oh,
meeting.
great.
It's really nice. And so
Excellent.
everyone's still connected and they're still rehearsing. So yeah, how important is music to you, especially during this crazy time?
Yeah, I have a side project where I'm writing lyrics for my own lyrics, and maybe I'll do what you said, Ed. Try and get those strange Portuguese phrases in there.
I'm ready to collaborate. I'm ready to collaborate.
Absolutely, I'm going to get you to send in your suggestions. But so I'm sending lyrics to a guitarist, and he's sending me back snippets of riffs and things, but we really haven't progressed further than that. We haven't worked out this working from different locations quite yet.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's trial and error right now, isn't it? I think the world's just been introduced to Zoom and the like. So yes, don't be too hard on yourself. And is it your autumn there right now, or should I say fall? Because that's a, you know, another Americanism. But it's fall there now, isn't it?
Yeah, we say autumn. Yes, it is our autumn.
We say autumn in England too. I'm just trying to include our American friends here. But
Well,
I was reading that you had like one of the hottest days like ever on Friday. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Friday was so hot, and it had already started to. The evenings had started to get cooler. As you can see, I'm wearing a cardigan right now. How old am I? So the mornings and the evenings are a little bit crisp, let's say. But Friday was sweltering. We had aircon on. I haven't had the aircon on, you know, in a couple of months now. So yeah, Australia's weather can be quite radical. I don't know whether that's a worldwide thing at the moment, but certainly Queensland, one day it can be, you know, freezing, the next day hot. I think probably the worst place though in Australia is Melbourne. Literally in Melbourne, you can have 4 seasons in a day.
Final question, and then we'll just do a quick close. I know you've got to go, Tony.
Sure.
So, Tony, how are you recreating right now?
Right now, I have a dog, so that's great. I can get out for walkies in the morning and in the afternoon, and one last one at night to make sure there's no problems with the carpet. And I'm doing yoga 2 or 3 times a week by myself here at home. Turn on a YouTube channel or something like that. That's about the best I can do. My yard's not long enough to run. So yeah, that's all I do. We are actually meditating a lot more. My wife has found a meditation tool. It's from Brazil, so it's in Portuguese. It's a guided meditation, and I've never been much for meditating, but it's been quite good. It's managed to help me relax a bit more, and at night it helps me get to sleep. So yeah, that's something new.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny because my girls have started enjoying listening to meditation apps before they go to sleep as well.
Great.
So yes, I think if you can, I think it's difficult to get into first of all, especially if you've never done it before. But once you just kind of succumb and let yourself, you know, just be relaxed, I think it can definitely help. Well,
Yeah,
Tony, listen, I know you've got to go. You've got a day job to go to. What time is it there right now?
it's about 7:20 in the morning, so I start in 10 minutes.
Have you had your breakfast yet?
Well, it'll do. Mind you, I'm working right beside the kitchen, so anytime I want something to eat.
That is one of the big advantages of working from home, for
Or
sure.
disadvantages for my figure.
Well, yeah, it depends. Yeah, the ease of getting to the fridge is pretty dangerous. I agree. Well, listen, Tony, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. And keep safe, keep well, and I'd love to check back in with you at some point soon.
Thanks, Claire. Take care.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye.
Bye.